This story is a little near and dear to me because I was one of the biggest Peep fans when he was around. His music was inspirational to me and his impact was something I wish people would not forget about. This is a short story about the life of Lil Peep and his impact on the music game. Even though his time in the game was short, he had such a legendary run, and I personally had wanted to cover it for the longest time, but I never got around to it until now. So, on to the story, which starts out on November 1st of the year 1996 in Allentown, Pennsylvania, born Gustav Elijah R. to Liza Womack. His mother, who was a first grade teacher, and his grandfather, John Womack, who was a professor at Harvard University. His father is not really that known aside from his profession as a professor at Harvard. A lot of his family and peers would mention that he was a young creative in a family full of scholars. Pete faced a problem with being different. As someone who was very open with expressing himself, he was someone who would often get criticized. He also had the struggles of just being weird by many at his school, and that made it difficult for him to form connections. Pete himself would admit to being a very sensitive individual, and he would admit to his insecurities, being self-conscious about what others thought about him. Pete, not following the norms, made it nearly difficult for him to connect to others. One of his biggest strengths was him being himself, but it still wasn't easy to be different, especially since his hobby was getting tattoos, which was a way for him to express himself. People around him didn't approach him, and this would cause him to be isolated. I myself identify with Peep's tattoo hobby aspect, since I have two personal tattoos, and one of them being the Crybaby album cover. Yes, I know, I'm such a fucking nerd. My editor is going to kill me for this, but
¡Cierre el hocico, pendejo!
Peep himself would talk about being in his room alone a lot of the time. Peep in an interview would state that he had a somewhat normal life, except when he was around drugs, which wasn't normal when he was a young kid. Peep hated school to the point that he would constantly skip. He was smart, but he just didn't like being there, and Peep would be up in his room playing video games and listening to music, mostly from rap and rock genres. He would soon start looking into SoundCloud music for a while and start to post his music on the platform. His biggest turning point in his life would happen around 2012, when he was only 15, and when his parents were divorced. That changed him a lot. His ex-girlfriend would note that he changed after they had broken up in the 10th grade. His early childhood affected his perception in life, and it could have been seen in his early music, and his pain was something that was felt, especially being so young and having to witness a lot from him being the outcast. To witness his father's affair, his mother talked about the moment when Pete took a stand against his father. The pain that Pete felt in such a betrayal would scar him. The courage he had to expose his father for his infidelity was something to admire. But remember, that was still a tough moment from his childhood that still caused him pain. A lot of his close friends would say that he disliked his father, whether it was shame or anger. He had a chip on his shoulder, but would never fully open up about it. In many cases, people didn't pry too much into it, so people only had glimpses. A common misconception about Peep was his education. I've seen a lot of articles say that he dropped out and got a GED from online learning. But his mom confirmed in Peep's own website that Peep was on the verge of dropping out, but he never did. Along with help from his teachers, Peep would graduate around 6 months ahead of schedule and then focus on his career. Soon, he would struggle with his mental health, with anxiety being a big problem. His mental health had changed him, and his mother would note the differences in his behavior and would start to isolate himself even more than before. His close friends and family kept checking up on him, but it wasn't so straightforward and kept himself at arm's length. Most of his struggles were made so clear in his music. As someone who struggles with mental health, I understand personally Lil Peep's struggles. I myself struggle accepting the fact that I am bipolar and have my mood swings here and there, which is why I personally enjoy listening to Lil Peep's music, since I feel his emotions. Now, back into the story, his grandfather was someone who Peep looked up to and was someone who took care of him in a lot of ways. He saw him as a father figure who took care of him. Lil Peep was a name he came up with after being called Peep by his mom and adding Little to his name. His original name was Trap Goose. He would start making songs and uploading them onto SoundCloud around the year 2014. He would make some songs in his room and would eventually start recording music videos with the help of his girlfriend, and as time kept going, he would make music that people would soon start to follow him on SoundCloud. His close friends and family would support him, even his mom, who would say that she would hear him record and it made her happy that he would put his all into music. Would be the start of his old music, which was something interesting even though it was scuffed. It's still a gem, and they all would be the catalyst to what he would soon become. With his rise, Lil Peep would also soon start to become confident in himself, because people would soon love his music, and support from the fans was what filled him to work harder. This was the push he needed. The sky's the limit for his sound. In 2014, soon after graduating from high school, Pete would move from Long Beach to California. From here, his career was in full swing, with nothing holding him back. Even with his success, Peep had a problem that he needed to address if he wanted to keep going. Peep, very early on, would start doing drugs at a young age, and this addiction was a demon that would still follow him throughout his whole career. In a No Jumper interview, he would talk about his struggles with addiction, and he would smoke weed, do Xanax, and drink lean. In his words, he did whatever people offered him, and this would be a problem for the rest of his career. When he moved into California, Pete would quickly burn through his savings and was often found just hanging out with friends and getting high in Long Beach, California. This was a point where his relationship with his girlfriend would start to get rocky, especially since she would mention not having a moment of peace with Peep because Peep always had someone over. There always was someone else in the house, and it would weigh on her, claiming that something needed to change or else it wouldn't work out. The relationship between him and his girlfriend would not work out, but she would still be in his life and help him with music videos. He would work with a few artists when he moved to Cali, but he would burn through his savings and he wasn't making money with his music and was homeless, living in Skid Row. During this time, he would work with people like Little Tracy, JGRXXN, Ghost Main, and would join a collective called Schema Posse, and Peep would spend most of his time at their house. Members would remember sharing one tiny room and essentially sleeping wherever they could, and they would record in subpar condition. Peep was a talent that attracted people to him and would help him grow. A lot of artists would collab with him, and he was just starting to build a buzz, especially when he would do shows and people just loved his work. He would release a lot of mixtapes that would put him on the map, like his first mixtape, Lil Peep Part 1, Mall Music, Live Forever, and Crybaby, would make an impact. Peep lived for his music, and it shows with the amount of time and effort he put into his work. His projects would just continue to become far more polished and more fleshed out. Peep, even though he was someone who had fame and status, had some issues when setting boundaries. In general, Peep had a hard time saying no to people, and his house was always full of people around him. At times, he couldn't even find peace in his own home, and wouldn't kick people out even if he was miserable. Peep had his fair share of bad friends, but he would still work with a lot of people as he was building up his group. Peep had a few beefs with other musicians and other people who would criticize him, even though he was a rising prospect who was still a young adult that was still learning, and through this would have some issues with other people. Not saying that he wasn't a nice person, it's just Peep was still human. He would make mistakes when working with people in the industry. From the looks of things, he was conflicted on making choices that would benefit his career, and he was put in tough situations where he had to decide whether he chose his friends or himself. He learned that the people around him weren't all fake, but Peep had to be able to make decisions for the betterment of his career, and that meant having to pick and choose who stays with him and who gets left behind. For a time, he joined the group Schema Posse, a hip-hop collective that was around during 2015, but this was short-lived because Peep would officially leave Schema Posse in less than a year. Near the end of 2016, Peep would join a new collective called gothboiclique, also known as GBC. With Little Tracy at his side, and with the help of other members from the GBC group, Peep would develop further, and he would release his mixtape Hellboy after joining the group, and would keep writing many more songs with their help. But this wasn't everything Peep had accomplished. Not long after, he would then be signed by First Access Entertainment. Peep at this point was big in the underground scene, but he wasn't yet the star people would remember him as. He was earning money, but wasn't yet the breakout artist. Money was rolling in with his music, and he had to start taking his image and career seriously. So he would work with both the label and GBC side by side, but this wasn't an easy thing to work around because there was tension between GBC and his label. Especially when you think that Peep was rocking with his collective and it was seen in his music, but his record label thought otherwise. People should know that Peep had developed a connection with them, and they were responsible for helping him, and it was very apparent not only was Peep repping his crew, but also had them in his songs and music videos. So to say that he and the GBC weren't working together are either unaware of Peep or they were peddling a bold-faced lie. Little Tracy was a friend that was with Peep since the beginning, and as well as some other members that would feature in his projects. I watched the documentary Everybody's Everything, and I will say that I personally find it strange that GBC wasn't mentioned too often in the video, even though they were the biggest contributors to its sound, and the documentary would try to rewrite history. I saw that the GBC consisted of multiple members, but in the documentary, I only saw like half of them, as well as them not being credited properly for the involvement with Peep. Especially when they were talking about Peep's addiction to drugs, the documentary has some heavy implications that his friends were responsible for his addiction and Peep was just a victim of peer pressure, when in reality, Peep was responsible for it as well. Peep's friends were probably the ones who supplied him with the stuff, but Peep is still responsible for his own struggles. His struggles were understandable, and his coping mechanism was extreme, but we aren't going to lie here and say that his addiction wasn't apparent. And I believe that it shouldn't have been downplayed as heavily, especially because his struggles were a prominent part of his career, with or without his friends' influence, and that is not an opinion, it's just a fact. Peep was caught on live, smoking and doing drugs. There is more than enough information detailing his history with his usage. His crew got the short end of the stick throughout this time. I personally believe that the documentary was made with rose-tinted glasses and did not give a full picture of his life. It felt a little too picture perfect and would often make Peep seem like a hero who would save the industry when in reality he was just a guy who loved music. He was special, yeah, but he was still human and made mistakes. Now, I won't bash the documentary because it was a good watch and it made me cry at times. But now that I watched it with a critical eye, I start to see the flaws, such as his addiction not being addressed properly, as well as the treatment of gothboiclique. GBC were a group of talented individuals who got shunned, and it's not surprising that a few newer fans knew very little about them. I personally found it a little disheartening to see that. We could see this shift in Peep's career where his label would start to interfere more and more with Peep's personal relations and his sound. The label wanted to make Peep the star of the show. They thought distancing him from his group was the only solution to this. But this wouldn't come without consequences. This move would single-handedly cause the tension which caused the rift between Peep and his crew. Little Tracy took it the hardest, and eventually the tension would spark drama between the two. Tracy, in particular, felt he was being left behind, and when Peep's management was actively trying to push GBC off to the side. Not only did Tracy feel forgotten, but he also felt betrayed, and that was a sentiment that some members had. This would come to a head when Peep wouldn't support his boys. Peep's management was in constant odds with GBC. Tracy would distance himself from Peep, and over time, they were both caught beefing with each other on social media. Their friendship ended bitterly, and Tracy would eventually move away from Peep. This was a decision that Tracy would regret even to this day, saying that his fight had to be one of the biggest mistakes he made. His friends aren't exactly owed anything for their contribution to Peep's career, but they were done dirty. Peep was told to focus on music when moving to London. This was probably one of his lowest times, where not only was Peep being overworked, but he felt alone. With his move and the conflicts back at home, Peep was truly at his lowest point. This was his biggest step into stardom, where Peep would go on tours shortly after moving to the UK, and would travel several countries in Europe and go to the US. He would release popular albums like Come Over When You're Sober, Part 1 and 2. Peep was shocked by the support people would give him, not just from his peers, but his fans. He would talk about the fact that he would sell out shows in different countries, and soon, he would see articles written about him. Now, the outcast was being accepted by others, and his risk had paid off because he was getting more and more opportunities. It was something beautiful to see, his surprise that there was a lot of fans who would go as far as to travel from other countries just to see him. Regardless of what went on, Peep was still rising and was making waves. His mother would talk about his wish to make music, but was a victim of the fast life that came with the music industry, and he was someone who wasn't safe from it. His need to keep on improving was too much for him, and this feeling of meeting all the expectations, the never-ending pressure, was immeasurable. This was something that would take a toll on him. His label wanted to create more projects and attend more shows. The unbearable weight of being a star was a struggle not many would understand, and it was always a slippery slope people would fall into. Being in Peep's position, he was basically able to do what he wanted. People not only enabled him, but encouraged him to keep it up. His busy work schedule when making music and handling his brand was something he had to juggle on top of having to travel. It was too much and he had to cope in one way or another. His girlfriend would note that he would try and get off the drugs, but in time, people supplied him with it, and she would also say that he was excessive with his drug use. Peep would abuse substances so much to the point he would feel distant and disassociated from reality. This could be seen in some of his later shows where he was in a daze, barely able to stay on his feet and being required to perform, and he would still rock the show, but his energy was not the same. This was a problem, and a lot of people around him enabled him in the same way that many of his fellow peers, who just got swept away by this hedonistic lifestyle. His fall would come if not addressed properly. His depression and his anxiety worsened, but he never got any proper prescriptions and would often self-medicate with weed and other substances. He even dubbed himself a productive junkie. This was a habit he wouldn't kick and would take a toll on him inevitably. Pete was on the cusp of greatness, but wasn't fully settled into life. Heck, I don't think he would have gotten used to the fame even though it brought him fortune. It was not worth the immense pressure he felt. People think that this was just him living the hedonistic life rock stars experience, but there was more nuance to this. We only had a small window into his life, but we knew he was suffering. Even though I don't condone the usage of drugs to Peep, the way he handled the pressure in the worst way possible, like it or not, he did what he could to cope, and during his tour in 2017, he would even talk about it. Pete was overworked and very stressed out with the need to perform, on top of having to put out even better music. On his last tour, on November 14, 2017, he would make this post on his Instagram. He said, "I just want to be everybody's everything. I want too much from people, but then I don't want anything from them at the same time. You feel me? I don't let people help me, but I need help. But not when I have my pills, but that's temporary. One day maybe I won't die young. One day maybe I'll be happy. What is happy? I always have happiness for like 10 seconds and then it's gone. I'm getting so tired of this." On October 2nd, 2017, Peep toured in North America, which would go on from October 2nd to November 16th. Peep had some issues with the label before starting the tour, but after that, it got sorted out and things would go on as usual. Yet there was a noticeable difference in Peep's behavior, and during his trip, he was on the tour and he would take a lot of drugs when he was on the tour bus. His crew got stopped when entering into Canada, and Lil Peep's manager, Belinda Mercer, was stopped by border authorities after finding illegal substances in her bag. She was detained and held for a long time, and during this time, the tour bus left without her. After a while, his manager paid a fine and would later meet up once Peep's crew was back in the US. This was something that was overlooked, but after that, she got back on the bus and things were business as usual. One thing to note was the abundance of drugs that were supplied to him, and his health concerns were overlooked. Peep, even though he was not feeling too good, would attempt to cancel his concert in El Paso, but soon after, Peep would post a video of him popping pills on his bus, as well as announcing he would soon be arriving to the concert regardless.
El Paso, I took 6 Xanax and I was lit. I'm good, I'm not sick. I'm gonna see y'all tonight.
Then, when he was on his way to Tucson, Arizona, he seemed to be high off a substance, and this was the norm for a lot of the other tours, but Peep was not acting normal. He would be very sleepy throughout the day, and people didn't bother him thinking this was normal. Some of his crew members would note that Peep would often go into a deep sleep and does not wake up till a while later. Peep's manager would check up on him, and then she would not question him or even do a further check up. Peep was slumped over in a seemingly deep sleep. Heck, even one of his friends posted this video of him sleeping, and his friend didn't check up on his condition. So things would go back to normal until they arrived in Arizona, where his manager tried to wake him up. His skin was pale and he seemed lifeless. On November 15th, 2017, a phone call was made.
I need an ambulance.
Okay, what's the address?
I'm at the Rock. I'm at the 24 The Rock.
Alright, tell me what's going on there.
I'm working with an artist and he's just completely out of it. He's cold, he's just knocked out. I don't know what he's facing, but he's completely out. He's not awake. We're trying to wake him up and he's not awake at all.
Breathing normally?
Not really, no.
Alright. We're getting the house sitting down. I want you to get him flat on his back on the floor with nothing under his head.
I'm on the phone to the ambulance now. Bro.
Okay, are you next to him now?
We're in the bus.
Okay, can you get him just flat on the ground?
We need to get him flat on the ground.
If he is not breathing normally, we need to start CPR to keep the oxygen pumping through his blood.
We need to get him flat on his back. We need to get him flat on his back.
CPR now. He is not
We need to
breathing
get him flat on his back.
We need to get him doing CPR. We need to do
On the
CPR.
floor. On the floor, yeah, on the floor.
Get whoever's doing it starts to get tired, have somebody else take over.
If she gets tired, then fucking take over.
Moments passed and the time was ticking, and Peep's fate was grim. He passed out and wasn't breathing. Peep was unconscious and the paramedics were on the scene. Meanwhile, his peers of GBC tried to contain the crowd of impatient fans who were there to see him. The members tried to prevent his van from interfering with paramedics who were attending to Peep. There was just a lot of panic, and the members just tried to stop the chaos and prevent further catastrophe. His fans were understandably pissed that Peep was not performing, citing medical emergency as the reason. But fans would be aware of the severity of the situation, and it all started to set in when they saw people hauling someone out from the van. Tensions were through the roof, and fans grew weary of what was about to come. In the cruel twist of fate, Gustav Elijah R., the rapper we know as Lil Peep, was pronounced dead on the scene from an apparent drug overdose. In the blink of an eye, we lost a legend, a man who had his future ahead of him. Lil Peep, at the age of 21, had passed away from an overdose. Toxicology reports would later confirm that he had a lot of drugs in the system, but reports would confirm that the true cause was Xanax that was laced with Fent. From the looks of things, this seemed to be accidental. Peep, even though he was struggling, never would be the kind of guy to take his own life, and he seemingly just took the Xanax without knowing. The phone call to his mother must have been a hard one to make. Peep held his mother in high regards, and having this news brought to her only after receiving a call from her son earlier in the day. The pain of losing a loved one is hard, especially when that loved one is your own son. That is something no mother should ever go through. Peep's death was announced to the world the day after, and the fast and hedonistic lifestyle finally took a toll on Peep. His time in the music industry was short, but he had a huge impact on the scene, which forever will be missed. Shortly after his death, his mother wanted answers and would file against the record label for wrongful death of Peep, and with that, the people wanted justice for Peep, blaming the label for negligence as well as being responsible for supplying him with the drugs. People were sad from the news and would send their condolences to him and his family. It was a huge loss, and people were saddened. Even though Peep was gone too soon, his memory would continue to live on with a few tracks and albums, which was posthumously released, as well as releasing a movie documenting his life, as well as concerts held in his memory, and merch that is still available for fans long after his death. Peep was a man who was hopeful and innovative. Now, I am older than he was when he passed. It feels a little uncanny. When I was younger, I thought he was someone to look up to and was a person who had it figured out. Or at least I thought that when I was still in school. As of now, I feel that strange feeling of helplessness in life. Sometimes, and it's hard to explain. On many occasions, I personally felt lost, alone, and scared of all the uncertainty that life had to offer. Pete probably felt the same. He left home straight out of high school and was thrown into a cruel world, as well as dealing with a dangerous addiction that took his own life. I believe Pete was still a kid inside. He was an adult on paper, but he didn't have everything figured out. His situation was much worse than mine, because when I needed people, my friends and family came in to help me from my worst moments. I felt a wave of sadness rewatching my favorite star suffering, as well as learning all the shady mismanagement and abuse he went through at the hands of this cruel world. I just hope he got what he always wanted. I admire his efforts and tenacity he had for his craft. Talent and passion like that is very rare, especially in an industry that is as harsh as it is lucrative. Even though he didn't have a chance to fully shine, he had such a big impact with little time Peep had, and he built a legacy that will not be forgotten. Long live Lil Peep.